The Industrial Revolution was a period during the 18th and 19th centuries in which rural societies became industrial and urban. The Industrial Revolution began in England in the late 1700s, and prior to that, manufacturing was done in people's homes using handmade tools and basic machines. Industrialization marked a transition from basic techniques to more powerful, special-purpose machinery with factories and mass production. The iron and textile industries, along with the development of the steam engine, were key players in the Industrial Revolution. The revolution also saw improved systems of transportation, communication, and banking. Some of the positives of the revolution were consumers now experienced an increase in volume and variety of manufactured goods. Some also experienced an improved standard of living. However, it also resulted in grim employment and living conditions for lower-class citizens. Without iron and coal, the Industrial Revolution would have never been possible. Coal provided, and still does, the power used to drive the steam engines. Coal was also used to make iron. Iron is used to make more intricate machines and tools and build ships and bridges. Iron is made through a process of separation known as smelting. Prior to the Revolution, smelting was done by placing iron ore in a furnace with a burning fuel that lacked the adequate amount of oxygen. The fuel that was used was charcoal. Charcoal, however, had become more rare and therefore more expensive. This process did not achieve maximum iron-making capacity and was expensive. The process of iron-making, however, was revolutionized between 1709 and 1713. A man by the name of Abraham Darby succeeded in using coke to smelt iron. Coke is made by taking coal and placing it in an airtight oven and heating it. Smelting with coke was much more efficient and economical than smelting with charcoal. But many manufacturers continued to use charcoal because they complained that coke iron was brittle and difficult to work with. In 1750, Darby's son, Darby II, developed a process that made coke iron as easy to work with as charcoal iron. After this revolution, coke smelting spread throughout the world.
Oil. The use of oil came from a basic need of the people. People wanted a better way to light up the night. Candles and whale oil, a major lighting fluid, had become increasingly expensive. Also, the population of whales had decreased greatly. People needed a cheap and inexpensive way to light things up. With more and more factories popping up, people also needed a lubricant for their machines. Entrepreneurs searched for a way to meet the needs of the people and make a lot of money. Scientists searched for some way to meet these demands, and they found lighting oil. The lighting oil was called kerosene and was used in a cheap lamp invented by a pharmacist in Europe with the help of a plumber. The kerosene lamp started a limited and very primitive oil industry in Eastern Europe that produced only an estimated 36,000 barrels of crude oil for kerosene production. Its growth depressed by a drilling technology consisting of peasants digging shafts to crude oil deposits. When the kerosene manufacturing technology and its lamps immigrated to the United States, the pieces were in place for the birth of the oil industry. In 1862, Congress passed and President Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Bill, which granted public land and funds to build a transcontinental railroad. The Central Pacific Railroad Company was hired to lay tracks from California heading east, and the Union Pacific Railroad Company was instructed to lay tracks from the Missouri River west. The labor was extremely difficult and often very dangerous. The working conditions made it very difficult to attract workers. The majority of the Central Pacific's laborers were Chinese. Eventually, both companies actively pursued Chinese workers because they were regarded as hardworking and willing to accept lower wages than white workers. As the construction continued, the two railroad companies began having competitions to see who could lay the most track in one day. The Central Pacific crew managed to lie over 10 miles of tracks in one day. The meeting of the two tracks occurred on May 10, 1869, and is known as the Gold Spike Ceremony. The country was now connected. A journey from San Francisco to New York used to take almost 6 months. The same journey now only took days. The railroad allowed people to travel more, farther, and in more pleasant conditions. However, even though the railroad brought the country together, it brought about the conflict with the Native Americans. The track ran through a number of different tribal territories, and this generated a conflict with the natives. The natives had very different feelings as to how the land should be used and lived on. The Transcontinental Railroad opened up the West to the rest of the country, even if they never visited it themselves.
Samuel F. B. Morse was born on April 27, 1791, and died on April 2, 1872. He is known for making improvements in the mode of communication information by signals by the application of the electromagnetic telegraph. He was inducted into the Inventors Hall of Fame in 1975. He developed an electronic alphabet carried by lightning wires, known as Morse code. A line was constructed between Baltimore and Washington, and the first message, sent on May 24, 1844, was, "What hath God wrought?" Samuel F. B. Morse was once a painter, but decided to pursue inventing in order to make money. He had little to no experience in electricity, but he understood that pulses of electrical current could convey information over wires. His interest in telegraphy came in 1832, and by 1835 he had worked out the elements of a relay system. The equipment was gradually improved and finally demonstrated in 1837.
Born in England in 1813, Henry Bessemer is known as the Steel Man. He is given this name because he is the first person to effectively produce a process for mass-producing steel, which is essential in skyscrapers and bridges. An American, William Kelly, held a patent for a system of air blowing the carbon out of pig iron. This was a pneumatic process of steel making in which air is blown through molten pig iron to oxidize and remove unwanted impurities. However, Kelly was forced into bankruptcy and decided to sell his patent to Bessemer. Bessemer at the time was working on a similar process. In 1855, he patented a decarbonization process utilizing a blast of air. The steel that is made today is made by using the Bessemer process. Bessemer was knighted in 1879 for his contribution to science, and he died in 1898.
Alexander Graham Bell is best known for his invention of the telephone in 1876. However, he is also second president of the National Geographic Society, invented a number of useful devices, founded the first telephone company, and was a noted humanitarian. In spite of the tremendous impact the telephone has had on society, Bell would have been a remarkable and an important figure even without the invention. Bell was born in Scotland in 1847 to a mother who was nearly deaf and a father who was an expert in speech. These facts, coupled with his grandfather's prominence as a speech expert, ensured Bell's interest in sound and speech from an early age, and he spent much of his life helping to teach the deaf to communicate. Bell admitted that had he known more about electricity, he might have never have set out to invent the telephone because he would have realized it to be impossible. However, he seems to have known enough to succeed and not enough to fail, and in 1876, after a great deal of work and experimentation, the pieces fell into place. Bell's invention was demonstrated at Philadelphia's Centennial Exposition in 1876, meeting with an instant acclaim. Bell died at his home in Nova Scotia in 1922. When he was buried, all telephone services in the United States was stopped for 1 minute to honor the man, his work, and his life.
Thomas Edison was born on February 11, 1847, in Milan, Ohio, and is known as one of the most famous and important inventors of all time. He invented the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph, and the motion picture camera, as well as improved the telephone. He acquired 1,093 patents in his life. His first invention to receive a patent was the electric vote recorder in June 1869. In 1877, Edison worked on a telephone transmitter that greatly improved on Alexander Graham Bell's work with the telephone. After the development of the electric light system, Edison fought off patent battles with another inventor, Joseph Swan, and he engaged in market battles with George Westinghouse. Westinghouse and Tesla had invented a high-voltage system, the AC system, to compete with Edison's low-voltage DC system. Eventually, Westinghouse's system triumphed in the marketplace. In Edison's later life, he focused on manufacturing rather than invention. Still, he managed to invent several important inventions, such as the kinescope, the dictating machine, and the storage battery. Edison was also a key player in the production of the early film industry. In 1911, Edison consolidated all of his businesses into the Thomas Edison Incorporated. He also began spending more time with his family and his dear friend, Henry Ford. He died on October 18, 1931.